The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The first autumn after the war settled gently over the Scottish Highlands, laying soft mists around the towers of Hogwarts. The castle breathed again, quietly, cautiously, as though it too were recovering from the wounds of the past years. In the headmistress's office, the fire burned low, throwing golden light on stacks of parchment and a half-finished cup of tea. Professor Minerva McGonagall sat at her desk, spectacles perched on her nose, rereading a letter for the third time. The letter was brief, written in a tidy hand. Dear Headmistress McGonagall, I am honoured to accept the position of Defence Against the Dark Arts Professor for the coming term. I hope my experience will be of service to the next generation. Sincerely, Alaric Byrne. Minerva placed the parchment down and frowned thoughtfully. She remembered the name. Byrne had been mentioned in the Order's records. A competent duelist, some said. A man who had kept to himself during the war, though his loyalty was beyond question. What she didn't know was why, after years of teaching abroad, he had chosen now to return to Britain, specifically to Hogwarts. Outside the windows, rain began to patter softly against the glass. Minerva stood, stretching her stiff shoulders. The castle was quiet at this hour. The students were asleep, and even the portraits seemed content to doze. She moved to the window, gazing down at the dark lake glimmering faintly under the moonlight. She had always found peace here, even during the worst of times. Yet tonight, that peace felt fragile, as if the air itself were holding its breath for something new to begin. The next morning dawned crisp and bright. The staff gathered in the great hall for breakfast before the students arrived. Hagrid was already there, waving cheerfully over a plate of scones, and Professor Flitwick was chatting animatedly with Pomona Sprout. Minerva took her place at the head of the table, nodding to each in turn. Then the great doors opened, and a tall man stepped inside. Alaric Byrne looked every bit the veteran of dark times. His hair was streaked with silver, though he could not have been older than his early 50s. And there was a faint scar along his jaw, like a thin brushstroke of pale ink. Yet his eyes, a clear grey blue, were warm and quietly observant. Professor Byrne, Minerva greeted, rising to meet him. Welcome to Hogwarts. He inclined his head. Thank you, Headmistress. It's good to be back in Britain. I confess, I hadn't realized how much I missed the smell of the Highlands. That earned him a rare smile from her. I can't imagine many find comfort in the smell of wet stone and lake water. Ah, but that's exactly what makes it home, he said easily, his voice low and steady. They spoke only briefly, the kind of polite exchange one might expect between colleagues meeting for the first time. But Minerva noticed how attentively he listened, how carefully he chose his words. He had a kind of quiet dignity that reminded her, painfully, of another man long gone. Over the next few days, the castle came alive once more. Students poured through the gates in laughter and chatter, their trunks clattering behind them, owls swooping through the rafters. The war had changed many things, but not the magic of September at Hogwarts. Minerva, ever the vigilant headmistress, threw herself into her duties. Yet she found herself, now and then, observing the new professor during meals. Burns spoke little, but when he did, even Severus's old chair seemed to lean forward to listen. He had a way of making others feel seen, respected. Even the most nervous first year who stammered during his first defense lesson left the classroom with a proud grin. It wasn't long before whispers began among the staff. "Quite a fine addition to the faculty," said Pomona, smiling over her teacup. "The older students say his lessons are remarkable. I do believe they admire him almost as much as they did Lupin." Minerva merely nodded, but something stirred faintly inside her. Admiration, perhaps, or curiosity. One evening, a week after term began, she passed by the defense classroom and noticed lights still shining beneath the door. She hesitated, then knocked. "Come in," called his voice. Inside, Burns stood beside a chalkboard covered with neat, looping runes. A soft glow emanated from a charm he'd cast over a small wooden chest. He looked up as she entered, and his expression brightened. "Headmistress, forgive me. I tend to lose track of time when I'm working." Minerva glanced at the runes. "Late night studying, Professor. That's a habit I understand well." He chuckled softly. "I'm revising my second-year curriculum. I want to make sure they learn not just the spells, but the courage behind them." There was sincerity in his tone that disarmed her. "Courage cannot be taught," she said, "only inspired." He met her gaze, and for a moment the air between them felt different, still, but alive. "Then I suppose that's the challenge," he murmured. She cleared her throat. "Do remember to rest, Professor Barn. Even the most courageous of us are useless without sleep." He smiled then, a small, genuine smile that softened his features. "Yes, Ma'am." As she left, Minerva felt a faint warmth at the edge of her thoughts. She told herself it was merely professional appreciation. After all, Hogwarts demanded her full attention. There was no time for distractions, especially not ones that made her heart beat faster. Yet, as she returned to her office, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass and realized something she hadn't in years. For the first time in a very long while, she was curious, not about a student or a lesson plan, but about a man. And that, she knew, could prove dangerous. Autumn deepened swiftly that year, painting the forbidden forest in gold and copper. The air turned crisp and full of whispers, the kind of air that made the castle seem both ancient and alive. Minerva McGonagall, now well into her second decade of leadership, found comfort in the rhythm of Hogwarts life. Morning lessons echoing through the corridors, laughter in the courtyards, the scent of wood smoke rising from the chimneys. Yet beneath all that order, something new had begun to stir, a quiet tension that she tried, unsuccessfully, to ignore. Alaric Byrne had settled into his position with surprising ease. His classroom was unlike any other defense against the dark arts room before it. The air shimmered faintly with enchantments designed to train focus, and the walls were lined with relics, charms and runes he had collected in distant countries. He treated his students with rare patience and dignity, expecting discipline, yet offering encouragement in equal measure. There was a calm strength about him that drew others close without his ever trying. Minerva noticed. She noticed the way laughter followed him in the staff room, the way Hagrid leaned in to hear his stories about dueling in far-off places, how even the portraits of old professors seemed to approve of his presence. What unsettled her most, however, was how much she herself enjoyed speaking with him. It started with brief conversations after meetings, discussions of curriculum or house rivalries, or the occasional student prank. But those talks stretched longer each time, spilling into the late hours when most of the castle had gone to sleep. Alaric had a mind that never stopped turning, and Minerva found herself intrigued by the way he spoke of magic, not as a weapon, but as a living thing that reflected one's heart. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled beyond the hills, Minerva stayed late in her office reviewing exam results. A knock sounded at her door. "Enter," she called, expecting perhaps Pomona or one of the prefects. But it was Alaric. He carried a small box wrapped neatly in brown paper. "Forgive the intrusion, headmistress," he said. "I came to return this. It was in the defense storeroom. I thought it might belong to you." Minerva raised an eyebrow as she took the box. Inside lay a slender wand case made of polished oak. Her breath caught. "Good heavens, I haven't seen this in years. It belonged to Albus." "I thought it might," Alaric said softly. The initials were engraved faintly along the hinge. I didn't wish for it to be left among the unused supplies." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, its warmth flickering over both of them. "You were with the Order during the war," Minerva said quietly. "Yet your name was rarely mentioned. You kept to the shadows." Alaric nodded. "I was a courier mostly. Messages, artifacts, information, work that required disappearing into the background." His tone was even, but something unspoken lingered beneath the surface, a heaviness she could sense. "After the war, I needed time away. I went north, taught at a small academy near Durmstrang. I thought I'd be content there, but Hogwarts called to me in the end." "It has a way of doing that," she murmured, almost to herself. He smiled faintly. "A castle of ghosts and memories." "And of stubborn professors who refuse to retire," she added, a touch of humor in her voice. His eyes glimmered. "I'd say Hogwarts is fortunate for that." Silence fell again, comfortable this time. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the panes. Then Alaric gestured toward the window. "Do you ever tire of the storms?" "Never," she replied. "They remind me that the world still moves, even when we feel standing still." For the briefest moment, their eyes met, and Minerva felt something unexpected, a warmth that reached deeper than friendship, quiet but insistent. She broke the gaze first, reaching for the parchment stack. "You should return to your quarters, Professor Byrne. The corridors grow cold at this hour." He inclined his head, a flicker of amusement in his expression. "Yes, ma'am, though I've learned that Hogwarts corridors are rarely empty, especially near curfew." She gave a thin smile, unwilling to show how much his presence unsettled her. After he left, the room seemed larger and emptier than before. The wand case lay open on her desk, Albus's initials catching the firelight. She closed it gently, her thoughts restless. The next weeks passed in a blur of lessons and letters from the ministry. A few students had begun whispering of unusual magical fluctuations near the northern tower, old wards shifting unexpectedly. Minerva investigated and found nothing amiss, though the feeling of instability lingered in her bones. The castle, she thought, was changing again. Then one evening, as twilight deepened into indigo, she heard laughter echoing from the courtyard below. Peering from her window, she saw Alaric standing among a small circle of students, guiding them through a defensive charm that glittered like silver mist. The scene tugged unexpectedly at her heart. The students' faces shone with admiration, and Alaric's voice carried with calm authority. He looked up once, as though sensing her gaze, and their eyes met across the courtyard. He inclined his head in a brief, silent greeting. Minerva felt heat rise to her cheeks and stepped back from the window quickly. Later that night, unable to sleep, she wandered the corridors alone. The portraits whispered softly as she passed, old faces murmuring approval or curiosity. Near the entrance to the defense classroom, she paused. The door was slightly ajar, candlelight spilling through the crack. Inside, Alaric sat at his desk, reading. The light caught the lines of his face, sharper now in concentration. She knocked softly. He looked up, startled but smiling. "Headmistress, you're developing a habit of finding me at odd hours." "So it seems," she said dryly. "I could say the same of you." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Would you sit? I was just reviewing something you might find interesting." Curiosity overcame propriety. She sat, and he handed her a thin parchment covered in ancient script. "These runes," he explained, "are part of the castle's oldest protective web. I believe they've begun shifting again, perhaps the cause of those tremors the students mentioned." Minerva frowned, tracing a line of faded ink. "This magic predates the founders themselves," she said. "How did you—" "I listen," Alaric interrupted gently. "The castle hums differently when something is wrong." She studied him for a long moment, seeing not just a professor, but a man bound to Hogwarts as deeply as she was. "You're perceptive," she said quietly. "Not as perceptive as you, headmistress." There it was again, that flicker, that warmth. The conversation lingered long past midnight, the two of them poring over ancient maps and half-forgotten incantations until the candles burned low. When she finally rose to leave, the first pale light of dawn had touched the windows. "We'll speak more of this tomorrow," she said, gathering her cloak. "Tomorrow, then," he agreed. But as she stepped into the corridor, she realized that something had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. The air itself felt different, as though the castle had been holding its breath and was now exhaling softly around them. She could not name what had begun between them. Only that, like the old wards stirring deep in the stones, it had awoken quietly and would not be easily stilled. October arrived in a blaze of scarlet and gold. The lake mirrored the crimson skies, and the air grew sharp enough to sting the skin. With each passing week, Hogwarts seemed to draw tighter into itself, corridors filling with warmth and laughter. While beyond the castle walls, winter whispered its approach. Minerva McGonagall stood by one of the upper windows of her office, her hands folded behind her back, watching as a pair of owls swooped through the twilight. On her desk, parchment lay scattered with reports of minor disturbances in the castle's magical structure. Flickering lights, sudden temperature drops, a ghost complaining of ripples in the wards. She had dismissed most of them as harmless quirks of ancient magic, until Professor Burns' theory began to gnaw at her thoughts. Alaric had become more withdrawn these past days. Though he continued his lessons with his usual quiet competence, Minerva noticed a certain weariness shadowing his face, as though he carried a private burden. When she questioned him after a staff meeting, he brushed it aside with a polite smile. "Just old memories, headmistress. Nothing worth troubling you." But she was not easily deceived. That night, she found herself walking once more toward the defense classroom, drawn by instinct rather than reason. The corridors were empty, lit only by floating torches that flickered softly. As she neared the door, she heard the faint hum of magic, deep, resonant, almost musical. Inside, Alaric stood alone in the center of the room, wand raised. A circle of blue fire surrounded him, casting shadows along the stone walls. He was murmuring an incantation in a tongue Minerva did not recognize, the sound rich and rhythmic. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the spell's power. When he finished, the fire sank slowly into the floor, leaving a faint shimmer. He turned and froze when he saw her in the doorway. "Headmistress," he said quietly, "you move too quietly for your own good." "I might say the same of you," she replied, stepping inside. "What was that? It looked like ward magic." He hesitated, then nodded. "An old stabilizing charm. I was testing whether it could anchor the shifting enchantments we've noticed. It's harmless, mostly." "Mostly," she repeated sharply. A flicker of amusement touched his eyes. "I prefer to be honest about my experiments." Minerva crossed her arms. "You should have informed me before attempting something of that scale." "I didn't want to worry you until I was certain," he said, his tone even. Then, more softly, "And perhaps I didn't want to fail in front of you." The words disarmed her more effectively than any spell. "Failure is no shame in research," she said briskly, though her voice was gentler than she intended. He smiled faintly. "You've never failed, have you?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You're mistaken," she said. "Everyone fails. The question is whether we learn from it." For a heartbeat, the tension between them softened. The firelight traced gold through her silver hair, and his gaze lingered just a moment too long. Then he turned away, busying himself with a stack of rune parchments. "I'll be careful," he said. "You have my word." "See that you are," she replied, though her tone lacked its usual steel. The next few days passed quietly. Students were preparing for the Halloween feast, and the castle buzzed with excitement. Yet beneath the cheerful chaos, a subtle unease rippled through Hogwarts. Strange draughts of cold air drifted through the great hall. Candles flickered without reason. Staircases shifted with unusual frequency. Alaric spent most of his time tracing these disturbances, often seen pacing the corridors with a focused expression, wand drawn to detect magical flux. Minerva observed him from afar, half concerned, half curious. His devotion reminded her of her own youth, when she had thrown herself into every mystery Hogwarts offered. On the evening of the feast, the great hall blazed with jack-o'-lanterns and floating bats. The long tables were laden with roasted meats, pumpkin pasties, and goblets of steaming cider. Laughter filled the room, and for a time the war and its scars felt far away. Alaric sat among the professors, smiling faintly at the students' antics. At one point, a third-year Gryffindor accidentally enchanted a pumpkin to explode into confetti, showering him in orange paper. The table erupted in laughter, and Minerva found herself laughing too. Real laughter, unguarded and warm. When the feast ended and the students drifted toward their dormitories, Minerva lingered in the great hall, overseeing the clean-up spells. Alaric approached her, brushing a bit of confetti from his sleeve. "Headmistress," he said, "may I have a word?" "Of course." He gestured toward the corridor. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing against the stone. Outside, the wind howled through the towers. "I believe the disturbances in the wards are centered beneath the castle," he said finally, "near the old foundations, where the founders first wove the protective enchantments. I can't access them alone." Minerva frowned. "That part of the castle hasn't been entered in centuries." "I know," he said, "but if the instability grows, the wards might falter altogether. The castle could become vulnerable to uncontrolled magic, residual energy, spirits, even curses left over from the war." Her eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting we explore the lower chambers?" "Yes, you and I, tomorrow night." It was madness, and yet she could not deny the logic. "Very well," she said after a pause. "We'll go together." He inclined his head. "Thank you, Minerva." Her name, spoken without title, caught her off guard. She didn't correct him. The next evening, after curfew, they descended into the depths of the castle. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the scent of damp stone. Their wands cast twin beams of light that danced along the walls. "Few have been here since the founder's time," Minerva murmured. "Perhaps for good reason," Alaric replied softly. They reached an arched doorway carved with ancient runes. The symbols pulsed faintly at their approach. Alaric traced one with his wand, muttering a countercharm. The stone groaned and parted, revealing a vast chamber beyond, filled with shifting light like water. At the center stood an enormous rune circle, etched into the floor, glowing with unstable energy. The air crackled. "This is it," Alaric breathed, "the heart of the wards." Minerva stepped closer, feeling the thrum of power underfoot. "It's unraveling." "Not unraveling," he said grimly, calling for help. Before she could respond, a surge of magic rippled through the chamber, throwing them both backward. Sparks filled the air. Minerva raised her wand, steadying herself. Alaric reached for her, catching her arm as another wave of energy pulsed outward. The lights dimmed. Slowly, the room fell silent again. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Only my pride," he said with a strained laugh. They stood close, too close, and for a moment neither moved. The heat of the magic still shimmered between them, and something deeper stirred beneath it, something neither dared name. When they finally climbed back toward the upper corridors, dawn had begun to break over the lake. The castle's hum had quieted, as if soothed for now. Minerva paused at the entrance to her office. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "No," Alaric agreed, "but we'll face it together." She hesitated, then nodded once. As the first light touched her face, she realized that somewhere between the wards and the shadows, trust had taken root. Dangerous, perhaps, but undeniably real. November crept over the highlands like a silver ghost. The trees shed their last leaves. The lake turned dark as obsidian, and the winds grew fierce enough to make even the bravest Gryffindor hurry between classes. Within Hogwarts, the fires burned high and steady, and yet an undercurrent of unease lingered beneath the laughter and clatter of everyday life. It had been a week since Minerva and Alaric's descent into the ancient chamber, and though the castle now rested quiet, she could not shake the memory of that night. The pulse of raw power beneath her feet, the surge that had nearly thrown them to the ground, and Alaric's hand closing around her arm. It had left an imprint she could not forget. In the daylight, she convinced herself that what she felt was merely the shared intensity of the moment. But in the quiet of her office, when the world outside fell still, she knew better. It was something else, something warmer, more perilous. The day after their exploration, Alaric had confined himself to the defense classroom, studying the runes they'd found. Minerva respected his space, but caught glimpses of him at mealtimes, his expression focused, almost haunted. Once, she passed him in the corridor and saw faint lines of fatigue beneath his eyes. "Professor Byrne," she had said, stopping him, "you're running yourself ragged." "I've been worse," he replied, forcing a faint smile. "But you're right, of course. I'll rest when I can." "Rest," she repeated pointedly. "That's an order." His laughter, soft and genuine, lingered behind her long after he walked away. Now, as November deepened, the students began whispering of strange dreams, visions of flickering lights, of ancient voices calling from the depths. Minerva dismissed most as overactive imagination. Still, something in the air had changed again. The castle, ever sensitive to the emotions of its inhabitants, seemed restless. Doors creaked open without reason. Candles guttered for no wind. Late one night, Minerva found herself once more drawn to the lower corridors, her wand light flickering over cold stone. The memory of her youth came to her, of long walks under the stars, of Albus's calm voice beside her, and the comfort of believing every mystery had a purpose. She paused near the stairwell to the dungeons, sensing rather than hearing another presence. Couldn't sleep either? Alaric's voice came softly from the shadows. He stepped into the light, his cloak dusted with frost. "I might ask you the same," she said. "You seem to haunt these halls as much as the ghosts." He smiled faintly. "They make better company than most ministry officials." Minerva gave a small, approving nod. "On that, we agree." They walked together in companionable silence, their footsteps echoing. The castle seemed to hum around them, an old creature murmuring in its dreams. "I've been tracing the magical threads from that chamber," Alaric said at last. "They reach farther than I expected, woven through the very foundation of Hogwarts. It's beautiful in a way. The founders created something alive." "Hogwarts is alive," she said. "I've always believed that." He looked at her then, a quiet respect in his eyes. "You've kept it alive, through more than one war." She gave a brief, self-deprecating snort. "I've merely ensured the roof doesn't collapse." "I think it's more than that," he said softly. "You're its heart, Minerva." The use of her name again. It startled her, though she didn't show it. "Careful, Professor Byrne," she said, her tone lightly edged. "Flattery doesn't suit you." "Not flattery," he replied. "Truth." They stopped before one of the narrow arched windows overlooking the moonlit grounds. Snow had begun to fall, softly, silently, blanketing the earth in silver. Minerva stared out for a long time. "The first snow of winter," she murmured. "It always feels like a promise." Alaric followed her gaze. "A promise of rest?" "Perhaps," she said, "or of change." He was quiet for a while, then spoke again, his voice low. "Do you ever wonder if we've given too much of ourselves to this place?" She turned to him, frowning slightly. "Hogwarts has been my life's work, my home. I regret nothing." "I didn't mean regret," he said. "Only that sometimes I feel as though I've hidden here. Teaching, researching, helping others grow brave while avoiding what I fear most. And what's that? He hesitated, then met her gaze. Connection, letting someone close enough to matter. The words settled between them like a spell neither had dared cast. Minerva looked away, the flickering wand-light glinting off her spectacles. You speak as though you expect to be hurt. Don't we all? He said quietly. Something in his tone, gentle but unguarded, tugged at her. She wanted to speak, to bridge the silence, but the words wouldn't come. Then a sudden tremor shivered through the floor, faint but unmistakable. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the torches flared blue. Minerva's instincts took over. She raised her wand, scanning the corridor. The wards again, Alaric said sharply. They're reacting. Before either could move, a wave of cold energy swept through the hall. It wasn't the chill of winter. It was older, deeper. The portraits shuddered, and the stone itself seemed to moan. Minerva cast a stabilizing charm, her voice firm despite the surge of magic. Finite incantatem. The tremor subsided slowly. When silence returned, both of them stood breathing hard. That was no accident, she said grimly. No, Alaric agreed. Something's stirring down there again. She met his eyes. Tomorrow night, we'll investigate once more, but this time we take precautions. He nodded. Agreed. As they parted, Minerva found herself acutely aware of the echo of his presence beside her, the faint scent of frost and parchment he left behind. In her office later, she stood by the window until dawn, watching the snow fall over the silent grounds. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain. Not about her school or her duties, but about her heart. The following evening they met again beneath the castle, armed with stronger spells and steadier resolve. The runic chamber glowed faintly when they arrived, its patterns shifting as though aware of them. This place reacts to emotion, Alaric murmured, crouching to examine the glowing sigils. It's responding to us. Then we must tread carefully, Minerva said. Together they began the incantations to reinforce the magic. The air shimmered, a low hum building into harmony. For a moment, it seemed to work. The runes brightened, the energy steadied. Then a flare of light burst upward, enveloping them in blinding brilliance. Minerva stumbled. Alaric caught her instinctively, steadying her with both hands. The world pulsed around them, magic swirling like a living wind. "Hold on!" he shouted. "I'm not letting go," she answered, gripping his arm. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light receded. They stood in silence, the rune circle calm once more. Alaric's hands still rested on her shoulders, his breath quick against hers. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, she stepped back, her composure wavering only slightly. "It seems the castle responds best when we work together," she said. He smiled faintly. "Perhaps it knows something we don't." Minerva's heart beat faster than it had in decades. "Perhaps," she echoed softly. Outside, the snow fell thicker now, wrapping the castle in silence. And deep within its ancient stones, the wards pulsed in steady rhythm, like the slow awakening heartbeat of something waiting to be found. Winter took Hogwarts in its icy grasp, and the world beyond the castle walls lay buried beneath snow. The lake had frozen solid, the Quidditch pitch glittered under a pale sun, and even the towers wore crowns of frost. Inside, the fires burned day and night, and the scent of pine drifted from garlands strung through the corridors. To the students, it was a season of delight. Laughter echoed across the great hall, and snowball battles waged on the lawns between lessons. Yet for Minerva McGonagall and Professor Byrne, the joy of winter was shadowed by unease. The ancient wards of Hogwarts, though momentarily stilled, were restless once more. A month had passed since their last venture into the depths, and though the castle's surface seemed peaceful, the two professors knew better. Beneath the stone floors, something had awoken, something not content to slumber again. Minerva found herself thinking often of Alaric's theory, that the castle's magic was alive, bound not only by spells, but by emotion itself. Hogwarts, in all its age and mystery, responded to the hearts of those who loved it, and perhaps even to those who loved within it. It was a dangerous thought, one she did not dare explore too deeply. Yet, as the days shortened and the nights grew long, she found herself drawn again and again to Alaric's company. They took to sharing tea in her office after supper, their conversations ranging from transfiguration theory to the peculiar habits of first-year students. It was a simple thing, but it steadied her. One evening, after the last student had gone to bed and the castle lay silent, he brought with him a small wrapped parcel. "For you," he said, placing it gently on her desk. She frowned. "It's not my birthday." "I'm aware," he said with a hint of a smile, "but it is the first snow of December. In the north, it's customary to give a token, a charm for protection through the winter." Minerva unwrapped the parcel. Inside was a small brooch shaped like a phoenix, carved from pale stone and set with a tiny ruby at its heart. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but you shouldn't have—" "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "You've given everything to this school, Minerva. Let someone give something back." For a long moment, she said nothing. The firelight reflected in the ruby, its glow pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Finally, she nodded and fastened it to her cloak. "Thank you, Professor Byrne," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "It's thoughtful." "Alaric," he corrected softly. She hesitated, then inclined her head. "Thank you, Alaric." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way she hadn't spoken to anyone in years. That night, long after he left, she remained by the fire, the brooch warm against her chest. She told herself it was the heat of the flames, but deep down, she knew better. The next day brought the first real storm of winter. Snow fell thick and fast, blurring the edges of the castle and muffling every sound. Classes were shortened, and students huddled in the common rooms with cocoa and books. Yet Minerva's thoughts were far from her duties. At noon, Alaric appeared at her door, his cloak dusted with snow. "There's something you should see," he said, "near the northern tower." She followed him without question. Together they climbed the narrow staircase, the wind howling through the high windows. When they reached the landing, Minerva saw it at once, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from cold stone. "The ward line," Alaric said grimly. "It's weakened again." She raised her wand, murmuring an incantation. The shimmer brightened, forming a glowing crack that pulsed like a heartbeat. "This is worsening," she said. "If it spreads—" "I know," he replied, "but there's more. Watch." He touched the edge of the glow with his wand. The light flared, and for a split second an image appeared. A figure, faint and ghost-like, standing within the wall itself. It was a woman, her outline blurred, her eyes hollow with sorrow. Then the light vanished, leaving only darkness. Minerva's breath caught. "A spirit?" Perhaps, Alaric said quietly, or a memory the castle itself is holding. She looked at him sharply. Do you think this presence is what's disturbing the wards? He hesitated. I think it's connected, and I think we'll need to go deeper than before to find the truth. They returned to her office to plan, spreading maps and runic charts across her desk. The conversation stretched late into the night until the candles burned low and snow whispered against the windows. At one point she glanced up and found him watching her, his expression unreadable. What? She asked, raising an eyebrow. He smiled faintly. You remind me of my old mentor. He used to say that true magic is born of purpose. You seem to live by that. I suppose I do, she said. Hogwarts has always given me purpose. And has it given you joy? The question caught her off guard. She looked away, tracing a finger along the edge of the map. There was joy once, she said quietly. In teaching, in the faces of the students, in the people we lost. Alaric's gaze softened. You've carried more than anyone should, Minerva. You deserve peace. She shook her head. Peace is for those who have finished their work. Mine is not done. Then let me help you finish it, he said simply. The words hung in the air, quiet but certain. Something inside her shifted, an acknowledgement of trust and something more dangerous beneath it. When he left that night, she stood for a long while by the window, watching his figure disappear into the snow. The castle seemed to hum softly, as though aware of what had passed between them. The following evening they descended once more into the depths beneath Hogwarts. The air there was colder than before, thick with the scent of age and damp stone. Their wand light glowed faintly blue, catching the carved runes that lined the walls. At the center of the chamber, the great circle of magic shimmered again. But this time, faint images moved within it. Faces, voices whispering half-remembered words. Alaric approached slowly, his wand steady. It's calling again, he murmured. Minerva joined him, her eyes narrowing. Then let's listen. Together, they chanted a revealing spell. The air trembled, and the chamber filled with light. From the center of the circle rose a ghostly figure, the same woman they had glimpsed in the wall above. Her eyes were gentle but filled with sorrow. You should not have come, the spirit whispered. The wards are tied to what was lost. They hold more than the castle. They hold our hearts. Minerva stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Who are you? The figure smiled faintly. Once I was Rowena's apprentice. I bound my life to these stones to protect them, but the binding weakens, as all love does when left unspoken. Then, as swiftly as she appeared, the spirit dissolved, leaving only silence. Minerva turned to Alaric, her heart racing. Love, she said slowly. The wards are bound by love. He nodded. And perhaps that's why they respond to us. The realization struck them both at once, and with it came a truth neither dared voice. The castle, ancient and sentient, mirrored the hearts of those who walked within its walls. Their growing closeness was not only human, it was magic, stirring the old enchantments awake. As they made their way back to the surface, neither spoke. The snow fell heavier outside, and the night seemed to hold its breath. In her office, Minerva unfastened her cloak and touched the phoenix brooch. Its ruby glowed softly, as though echoing the warmth she tried so hard to hide. For the first time in many years, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing close, and for once, she did not push it away. Christmas descended upon Hogwarts in a swirl of snow and candlelight. The great hall glittered with 12 towering trees, each adorned with shimmering icicles and golden stars that spun slowly in mid-air. The students sang carols between mouthfuls of treacle tart, and the air smelled of cinnamon, pine, and something that might have been hope. Yet for Minerva McGonagall, the season brought little rest. Though she smiled and clapped when the choir sang, her thoughts often drifted downward to the hidden chamber, the echoing runes, and the spirit whose voice had trembled like wind through old stone. Love left unspoken, the ghost had said. The words had haunted her. Alaric Byrne was no less restless. When the feast was over and the last of the students had gone home for the holidays, he remained behind with a small group of seventh years who had chosen to stay. He threw himself into work, studying the castle's ancient magic late into the night. Yet even when he sat surrounded by books, his thoughts wandered to the same place, to the woman who led Hogwarts with iron resolve and a heart she thought long buried. The snow thickened outside, falling in heavy, silent drifts. In the evenings, the castle seemed almost otherworldly. Minerva would walk the corridors alone, her footsteps echoing softly. She often paused near the North Tower, where the shimmering fault lines still pulsed faintly behind the stone. It felt alive, watching, listening. On Christmas Eve, she found herself unable to sleep. She rose from her bed, wrapped her tartan shawl about her shoulders, and left her chambers. The castle was silent except for the whisper of the wind. She moved through the halls by memory, guided by the faint blue light of her wand. When she reached the staff corridor, she saw a glow beneath one of the doors. Alaric's. For a moment she hesitated, then knocked softly. "Come in," came his voice, low and weary. He looked up from his desk as she entered, his expression softening in surprise. "Headmistress, I didn't expect visitors at this hour." "Nor did I expect to be visiting anyone," she replied dryly. "But it seems sleep eludes us both." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Then we might as well keep each other company." She sat, and for a time neither spoke. The fire in his hearth crackled quietly, casting long shadows across the room. He poured tea into 2 mugs, handing one to her. "Merry Christmas, Minerva," he said gently. She inclined her head. "Merry Christmas, Alaric." They drank in silence for a while. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window. He set his cup down, his gaze distant. "Do you ever wonder," he said, "what Hogwarts remembers? The founders, the battles, the laughter, the loss. It must carry all of it." "Memory is the price of longevity," she said. "The castle endures because it remembers." He looked at her then, eyes unreadable. "And what of those who serve it? Do we endure too?" She smiled faintly. "We try." He hesitated before speaking again. "When we stood in that chamber, when the spirits spoke of love left unspoken, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I still can't." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "The wards respond to emotion," she said quickly, deflecting. Perhaps it was speaking of magical bindings, not sentiment. "Perhaps," he said softly. "But what if the two are one and the same?" She met his gaze, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. The firelight flickered, painting gold across his features, and something unspoken passed between them. Fragile, dangerous, real. Before either could say more, the temperature dropped suddenly. The fire dimmed, the shadows deepened, and a faint hum filled the air. Alaric was on his feet at once. "The wards," he murmured. "They're shifting again." Minerva rose beside him. "Then we must act quickly." Together they raced through the halls, their wands blazing. The castle itself seemed to groan, a low vibration running through the floor. Portraits stirred, calling warnings, and the air shimmered with unseen magic. They followed the disturbance to the northern tower. There, the crack in the wall had widened. Pale blue light spilled from it, flickering like a heartbeat. "Stand back," Alaric said, stepping forward. "I'll try to contain it." "No," she said sharply. "We do this together." He nodded once, and they began their incantations in unison. Their voices rose and fell in harmony, old words of binding and restoration echoing through the tower. The light surged, fighting against their magic, until it burst outward in a blinding wave. When the glow faded, they stood in silence. The crack had sealed, but in its place, something new shimmered faintly upon the stone. Runes, not just protective ones, but words in ancient Gaelic. The jail Akumail and Aite Seo Seasmak. Minerva read it aloud. "Love keeps this place strong." Alaric looked at her, wonder and realization mingling in his expression. "It's what the spirit meant." She nodded slowly, her heart pounding. "Then it isn't just magic that sustains Hogwarts. It's emotion, loyalty, courage, love." He smiled faintly. "All the things you've given it." She met his eyes, the weight of the years between them melting in the warmth of that look. "All the things we've given it." For a long moment, neither moved. The silence between them was deep but not empty. Outside, the storm raged on, snow sweeping across the castle towers, but here in the dim light, there was only stillness. Finally, Minerva drew a slow breath and turned toward the stairs. "The wards will hold, at least for now," she said. "Yes," Alaric replied softly, "but something tells me this isn't over." As they walked back through the corridor, she could feel the air around them, quieter, steadier. The castle seemed at peace once more, yet she could not shake the sense that it was watching them, waiting. When they reached her office door, she paused. "You should rest, Alaric. You've done enough for tonight." "So have you," he said, his voice low. "But somehow I doubt you will." Her lips curved faintly. "You're learning." He hesitated as though there was more he wished to say, then only inclined his head. "Good night, Minerva." "Good night," she answered. When he was gone, she stood in her office a long while, staring into the fire. The brooch on her cloak caught the light, its ruby gleaming like a captured flame. "Love keeps this place strong." The words echoed in her mind until they no longer belonged only to the castle. Outside, the first light of Christmas morning crept over the mountains. Snow glistened on the towers, and deep within the walls, the wards hummed softly, content, for now, in the warmth they had rekindled. And Minerva McGonagall, who had thought herself far beyond the reach of such things, felt the quiet stir of something she had long denied, a hope not for Hogwarts, but for herself. The new year dawned beneath skies of pale silver, and the highlands lay silent beneath a heavy quilt of snow. The holidays passed quietly, and by the time the students returned to Hogwarts, the castle seemed to breathe easier. The wards no longer trembled in the walls, and even the portraits whispered with a note of relief. Minerva McGonagall stood by the window of her office on the first morning of term, watching as the carriages approached. She had always loved this moment, the sight of the students returning, their laughter echoing across the courtyard, their bright scarves snapping in the wind. It was the sound of life, of continuity, of the world mending itself. Yet this time her thoughts strayed not to the school, but to the man who had stood beside her on Christmas Eve when the wards had nearly burst apart, Alaric Byrne. She had not seen much of him since that night. He had taken to spending long hours in the library's restricted section, poring over tomes of ancient magic. When they crossed paths in the corridors, he greeted her with his usual warmth, but there was something quieter about him now, a gravity she could not name. The days passed swiftly. The castle returned to its familiar rhythm. Lessons, laughter, the occasional explosion from the potions classroom. Yet every now and then, Minerva felt a tug of awareness, a faint hum in the air, as though the castle itself were calling to her. One evening in late January, she received a brief note delivered by one of the castle's owls. The parchment bore no seal, but she recognized the handwriting instantly. Headmistress, I believe I've discovered the root of the disturbance. Meet me in the library after curfew. Bring your wand and caution. A.B. Minerva sighed softly, though she could not suppress a flicker of curiosity. The library at night was a world of its own, dark, silent, and full of whispers. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting a warm, golden pool of light. Alaric stood beside one of the high tables, surrounded by open books and parchment covered in runic sketches. Professor Byrne, she greeted. You do enjoy testing my patience. He looked up with a faint smile. Good evening, Minerva. I promise it was not my intention to cause alarm, but I've found something important. He gestured for her to come closer. Do you remember the phrase we saw upon the stone, the one that spoke of love? Of course, she said. Love keeps this place strong. He nodded. I believe it's not merely a sentiment, it's a directive. The founders wove their emotions, loyalty, friendship, and yes, love, into the wards themselves. They created a network of magic bound not by power, but by connection. Over centuries, that web has frayed. Each generation of professors has unknowingly renewed it through their devotion to this place. And you think the recent disturbances are because that bond is weakening? Yes, he said. And there's more. The runes from the northern tower, the ones that flared when we worked together, they've shifted again. The castle is responding to us. Minerva felt a chill unrelated to the cold air. Responding to us, he nodded. When we channeled magic together, it stabilized the wards. Two sources of intent bound by trust. That's what the castle needs. Balance. Harmony. For a long moment, neither spoke. The truth hung between them, shimmering like the light from the fire. Then she said quietly, You mean to suggest that our connection has become a part of Hogwarts itself? Yes, he admitted. And if we don't acknowledge it, the magic will remain unstable. The castle knows, even if we do not. She turned away, her mind a storm of thought. Alaric, this is dangerous speculation. Hogwarts is not sentient in the way you imply. Isn't it? His voice was soft but sure. We've both felt it. The pulse beneath the floors, the hum in the walls. This castle has a heart, and it beats with ours. Minerva stared at him, unable to find words. He looked so certain, so quietly resolute, that for a moment she envied him. Then she said, more softly, "You may be right, but if that's true, then our emotions have consequences." He smiled faintly. "They always do." Before she could respond, a sudden chill swept through the library. The lamps flickered, the fire guttered low. Minerva spun toward the shadows, wand raised. From between the shelves came a soft, echoing whisper. Then another. The sound grew, a chorus of voices, old and sorrowful, speaking in a language older than English. "The castle," Alaric murmured. "It's awakening again." They stood shoulder to shoulder as the air shimmered with ghostly light. The books along the nearest shelf trembled, their pages fluttering like frightened birds. Then, from the center of the room, a form began to take shape, a figure woven of light and memory. Minerva recognized her at once, the spirit they had seen before, the apprentice of Rowena Ravenclaw. "You meddle with forces bound by love," the spirit said, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Do you understand what it means to awaken such magic?" Minerva stepped forward, her wand steady. "If we do not, then teach us." The ghost's eyes, pale and luminous, rested upon them both. "To renew the bond that holds this place, you must do what the founders did. You must give of your hearts, freely and without fear." Alaric's voice was barely a whisper. "And if we cannot?" "Then the castle will fade," the spirit said simply. "Magic cannot live where love is denied." With that, she vanished, leaving only silence and the faint scent of snow. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire sputtered, casting soft gold across the pages of the books. Minerva exhaled slowly. "What she asks is impossible." "Is it?" Alaric said quietly. "We've already begun, Minerva. We've already given more than we realize." Her eyes met his, and in that gaze, she saw everything she had tried to keep buried, the warmth she feared, the trust she had not meant to offer. "Do you mean to tell me," she said softly, "that saving Hogwarts requires us to admit what neither of us dare name?" He smiled then, weary and kind. "Perhaps, or perhaps it only requires that we stop pretending not to feel it." For a moment, she said nothing. The fire cracked softly between them. Finally, Minerva looked away. "We'll discuss this tomorrow," she said, her voice steady again. "For now, we've both earned some rest." Alaric nodded, though she saw the faintest trace of disappointment in his eyes. "Tomorrow, then." As she walked back to her chambers, the corridors seemed different, quieter yet alive with an unseen current. The castle's pulse echoed faintly beneath her feet, steady and strong. And though she would never admit it aloud, Minerva McGonagall felt that same rhythm in her own heart, ancient, cautious, but beginning, at last, to stir. The heart of winter clung stubbornly to the Scottish hills, wrapping the castle in frost and silence. The air was thin and sharp, and the world beyond the enchanted windows seemed trapped in a timeless stillness. Inside Hogwarts, the warmth of fire and laughter battled the season's chill. But for Minerva McGonagall, comfort was a stranger. She moved through her days as she always had, with precision and calm authority, but her thoughts were elsewhere, drawn again and again to the echo of a voice in the library. Magic cannot live where love is denied. She had spent her life serving Hogwarts, its traditions, its students, and its endless needs. Love had always been present, yes, but in the muted, dutiful form of a teacher's care, a headmistress's devotion. Never had she considered it as a force of power, one that could shape spells and steady ancient wards. And yet, Alaric Burne's words, his steady faith that emotion itself bound the castle, had burrowed deep into her mind. She could no longer deny that something lived between them. It had begun in cautious curiosity, sharpened into respect, and quietly transformed into something else, something she neither welcomed nor could bear to lose. That morning, the snow finally relented. Thin sunlight spilled across the grounds, glinting off the frozen lake. Minerva stood at her window, her hands resting on the cold stone sill, watching the world wake from its long sleep. She did not turn when the door opened behind her. "I thought I'd find you here," came Alaric's voice, warm and familiar. She glanced over her shoulder. "And you thought correctly." He smiled faintly as he approached. "The wards are quiet, for now, at least." "For now," she repeated, her tone soft. "You and I both know Hogwarts never rests long." He nodded, moving to stand beside her. For a moment they watched the snow-laden trees sway gently in the wind. Then Alaric said, "I've been thinking about what the spirit told us." "So have I," she admitted. "She said the castle's strength comes from love freely given. That means the founders must have bound more than magic to these stones. They bound themselves." Minerva turned to him, her expression grave. "And you believe we must do the same?" He met her gaze. "I do. But it doesn't have to mean surrender. It's a choice, to let the castle see us as we are, without pretense." She looked back toward the snowy grounds. "That's easy for you to say, Professor Burne. You've always been more comfortable with emotion." "Comfortable?" He gave a quiet laugh. "I've spent half my life avoiding it. But Hogwarts doesn't lie. It knows when we're hiding." Minerva's lips pressed into a thin line, though her eyes softened. "And you think I'm hiding?" "I think you're protecting yourself," he said gently. "You've built your life around duty, and you've done it beautifully. But even duty can become a cage." She bristled, though not in anger, more in defense. "And what would you have me do, Alaric? Throw open the gates? Confess that—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. He didn't speak, only waited. When she finally met his eyes again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "That I've grown to depend on you more than I should." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. He took a slow breath, his expression softening. "That's not a weakness, Minerva. It's what makes us human. It's what gives us power." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Perhaps you're right, but if what we feel is bound to the castle, then we must be cautious. Magic this old doesn't take kindly to confusion." "Then let's give it clarity," he said quietly. She looked at him, startled by the calm in his tone. But before she could respond, a tremor rippled through the floor, so subtle at first she thought she imagined it. Then another, stronger. The windows rattled. They both turned toward the door. "The wards," Alaric said sharply. "Something's wrong." Without hesitation, they ran. Through the corridors they flew, robes billowing, wands drawn. Students peered out from classrooms as the castle began to shudder, a deep, resonant sound rising from its very foundations. Dust drifted from the ceilings. Torches flickered wildly. When they reached the base of the northern tower, the air was thick with magic. The runes etched upon the stones blazed with fierce blue light, and the hum of power was deafening. Minerva raised her wand. "Containment first!" They began to chant in unison, their voices strong and sure. The light fought them at first, swirling like a living storm, but gradually it bent to their will. Alaric's hand brushed hers as he moved to steady the spell, and the touch sent a jolt through her that felt both magical and utterly human. "Steady," she called. "Just a little more." The light surged, then burst outward one final time before collapsing inward with a deep, echoing sigh. When the glow faded, the runes were still, their light dimmed to a faint shimmer. They stood in the silence that followed, breathing hard. "It's stabilized," Alaric said after a moment. "But it's stronger than before. It's evolving." Minerva frowned. "You think it's learning?" He nodded. "It's reflecting us, our magic, our intent. The bond between us may be affecting the wards directly." Her heart pounded. "Then the stronger our connection, the stronger the castle becomes." "Yes," he said softly, "but it also means if that bond were broken." She finished the thought for him. The wards could fail entirely. The truth hung between them like a curse. For a long moment, neither dared speak. At last, she said, "Then we have no choice but to keep the bond intact." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Minerva, that isn't something we can fake. The castle would know." "I'm not suggesting deception," she said sharply. "I'm suggesting commitment. If this connection between us strengthens Hogwarts, then we owe it that much." Something in his gaze softened. "And what do we owe ourselves?" The question struck her with more force than any spell. She looked away, the torchlight glinting off her spectacles. "We'll discuss that when the castle no longer depends on us." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You always did know how to postpone the impossible." When they finally left the tower, dawn was breaking beyond the mountains. The sky blazed with gold and crimson, and the snow glittered like powdered glass. The worst had passed, for now, but the quiet between them was heavier than ever. In her office, later that morning, Minerva stood before the hearth, the firelight flickering across her face. She could still feel the echo of his magic intertwined with hers, the steady rhythm that had held the wards together. She touched the phoenix brooch at her collar, its ruby glowing faintly, and whispered to the empty room, "Magic cannot live where love is denied." Outside, the castle murmured in its sleep, its great heart steady once more. Yet deep beneath its stones, the ancient runes pulsed faintly with new light, alive, listening and aware of every heartbeat that had given them strength. And far away in the northern tower, Alaric Burns stood alone, staring out over the snowy grounds, knowing that something far greater than magic had begun to bind him to the woman who led Hogwarts. He only hoped that when the time came, she would not turn away from it. February arrived like a whisper through the mountains, cold, brittle, and watchful. The castle had settled after the last tremor, but in its stillness lay something uneasy, as though Hogwarts itself was holding its breath. The wards were quiet, yes, but their glow had changed. Their light pulsed with a deeper hue, golden instead of blue, and Minerva could feel their rhythm beneath her feet whenever she walked the halls. It was not unlike a heartbeat. The professors had noticed too. Flitwick mentioned how his charms had grown sharper, more efficient. Pomona's greenhouses were thriving in unnatural bloom despite the frost outside. Even the portraits seemed livelier, their painted eyes brighter than before. Only Minerva and Alaric knew what truly stirred beneath the stones. The bond they had forged, whatever strange power it carried, had begun to ripple outward, touching every corner of Hogwarts. Minerva tried to ignore it at first. She threw herself into her work with the same discipline she had known all her life. Lesson plans, correspondence with the ministry, the endless rhythm of responsibility. But there was a tension in her now, something she could neither suppress nor entirely understand. Every time she passed Alaric in the halls, the air seemed to shift. Quiet, watchful, aware. It came to a head one evening when he appeared unannounced at her office door. "Minerva," he said, his tone urgent. "You should see this." She looked up from her desk, frowning. "What is it?" He only gestured. "Come with me." The corridors were dark, lit only by their wand light. They moved quickly, past the whispering portraits and slumbering suits of armor, until they reached the North Tower once more. There, upon the stone floor, the runes they had fought so hard to contain glowed with soft gold light. But they were no longer still. The markings shifted like living things, weaving and curling in slow, graceful motion. Between them shimmered faint images, memories perhaps, snatches of the past. A girl with dark curls casting her first spell. A boy laughing by the lake. A younger Minerva in her teaching robes, stern but proud. "What is this?" she whispered. "The castle's memory," Alaric said quietly. "It's showing us its heart." She crouched to study the glowing runes, her wand trembling faintly. "Why now?" "Because it's awakening fully," he said. "It's drawing strength from us, and from everything we've ever loved within these walls." As she watched, one of the glowing scenes shifted. It was Albus Dumbledore, standing at the Great Hall's dais, his eyes kind and wise as ever. Then the image dissolved into another. Two figures standing side by side before the battle, wands raised. Herself and Alaric. The sight of it stole her breath. He moved beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see now? Hogwarts isn't just magic bound in stone. It's emotion made manifest. It's every act of courage, every sacrifice, every kindness that's ever been given here." She looked at him then, really looked. And what happens if that emotion falters? He met her gaze steadily. Then the heart of the castle will falter too. There was a silence between them, so deep it seemed to swallow the very air. She could feel the warmth of him beside her, the quiet hum of his magic mingling with hers. For an instant, it was not the castle's heart that beat beneath her feet, but her own. "Alaric," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "This connection, it's changing us." "Yes," he said simply. "It is." She turned away, unwilling to meet his eyes. "You don't understand. My life, this place, it's all I have. If I let this—" She stopped herself, unable to finish. He reached out then, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "Minerva, you don't have to choose between the two. Perhaps Hogwarts called us together for a reason." She almost laughed, a bitter, fragile sound. "A reason?" "To remind us that magic and love are one and the same," he said. "You've given this castle your strength for years. Perhaps now it's giving something back." His words sank deep, stirring something she had long buried. For a moment, she let herself stand still, feeling the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her sleeve. Then she drew a steadying breath and stepped back. "The wards are stable," she said briskly, regaining her composure. "We'll continue monitoring them from the tower, but we must not allow personal sentiment to cloud our judgment." He smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. "If that's what you need to believe." They left the tower together, but in silence this time. The castle watched them go, its walls faintly humming with a magic that was neither dark nor light, something in between, something ancient and human. The following days passed in uneasy quiet. The students went about their lessons, unaware of the strange energy pulsing through the very stones. Alaric spent more and more time in the tower, studying their evolving runes. Minerva avoided him as best she could, though avoidance did little good. The bond between them was too strong now, and she could feel his presence even when he was far away, like a spell that refused to fade. One night, unable to sleep, she walked to the great hall. The long tables stood empty, the ceiling alive with a swirl of stars. The stillness there comforted her. She remembered her first night as a teacher, her first lesson, her first triumph, and the quiet ache that had followed every loss. "I've spent my whole life here," she whispered to the empty room, "and yet I never realized it was listening." A soft voice spoke behind her. "It's always listened." She turned. Alaric stood in the doorway, cloak draped over his shoulders, his expression unreadable. "I thought you were in the tower," she said. "I was," he replied, "but the wards are quiet tonight. I thought perhaps you would be here." She smiled faintly. "You're learning my habits too well." He stepped closer. "Only because I share them." They stood together in silence for a long while, the moonlight streaming down through the enchanted ceiling. The air between them hummed faintly, the same steady pulse she felt in the castle's stones. "Finally," he said, "you don't have to be alone in this, Minerva." Her throat tightened. "I've always been alone in it. It's what's kept Hogwarts safe." "And who keeps you safe?" She looked up sharply, but the question struck too deep to answer. Her composure wavered, her defenses cracked. And in that moment, the wards themselves seemed to stir, the ceiling's starlight brightening until it glowed like day. Alaric stepped closer. "Do you feel that?" She nodded, unable to speak. "The castle responds to truth," he said softly. "You don't have to say it aloud. It already knows." And in that instant, the walls of Hogwarts pulsed with a warmth she had never felt before. Not the cold precision of enchantment, but the quiet, living heartbeat of understanding. When dawn broke, the light through the windows was different, warmer, golden. The castle's hum had changed again, its rhythm slow and strong. Minerva McGonagall stood by the window in her office, the phoenix brooch at her collar gleaming in the sunlight. She did not know what the next days would bring, but she knew this: the wards would hold for now. The castle's heart was steady, and somewhere deep within her own, something long frozen had begun, at last, to thaw. March came to Hogwarts with a restless wind, carrying the scent of thawing earth and distant rain. The snow had begun to melt from the grounds, leaving behind glittering patches of frost that shimmered under the weak sun. Crocuses dared to bloom near the edge of the courtyard, and from the forbidden forest came the soft cry of a returning bird. It should have been a season of calm, yet the castle felt more alive and more watchful than ever. Minerva McGonagall could sense it in the air, the same way one senses a storm before it breaks. The wards were not trembling, nor cracking as they once had. No, they pulsed with vitality, steady and strong, yet the rhythm had changed. It was as though Hogwarts itself were awakening from a long sleep, stretching ancient limbs and whispering secrets to the wind. And at the centre of it stood the headmistress and the man who had, unknowingly, become part of its very heartbeat. Alaric Byrne had grown quieter since their last conversation in the Great Hall. He still fulfilled his duties with precision and grace, his lessons earning the admiration of even the most skeptical students. Yet there was a distance to him now, a restraint that mirrored her own. They spoke only when duty required it, but each word felt weighted with everything left unsaid. The castle, however, refused to let silence reign. One afternoon, as Minerva crossed the courtyard between classes, she felt the air thrum faintly beneath her boots. The students around her paid no mind, but she stopped, sensing something deep within the stones, an echo of laughter, of memory. For a brief moment, she heard the distant toll of the ancient bell that had not rung since Dumbledore's passing. When she told Alaric later that evening, he nodded gravely. "It's remembering again," he said. "The past bleeding into the present. It's as if the castle is preparing." "Preparing for what?" she asked. He hesitated, then met her gaze. "For a choice." She frowned. "What kind of choice?" "The kind that will decide what binds it next. Magic needs a foundation, Minerva. The founders built theirs on unity, loyalty, and love. But times change. The castle needs something new to sustain it. And you think it's waiting for us to provide it?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." She said nothing more, but the words took root within her. For the next few days, she moved through her duties as though through a dream. Every corridor seemed to hum softly with unseen energy. Portraits turned their heads as she passed, as though listening. Even the staircases seemed to shift more gently, as if in reverence. It was on the eve of the spring equinox that everything came to a head. A storm gathered that night, rolling down from the mountains in dark, shuddering waves. Rain lashed the windows, and thunder shook the towers. Minerva had just finished dismissing the students to their dormitories when she felt the first tremor beneath her feet. She froze. The tremor came again, stronger this time. The wards. Without hesitation, she seized her cloak and strode into the hallways, her wand lighting the way. As she neared the northern tower, she saw Alaric already there, his hair damp with rain, his eyes lit with urgency. "They're surging again," he said over the howl of the wind. "But this time, they're not breaking. They're calling." "Calling for what?" He looked at her, rainwater glistening on his face. "For us." The tower chamber glowed with fierce golden light. The runes on the floor had come alive once more, their symbols spinning slowly like the gears of some vast invisible mechanism. The air was thick with energy, almost humming with song. Minerva felt her magic stir instinctively, resonating with the power around her. She raised her wand. "We must steady it before it overwhelms the castle." "Not steady," Alaric said. "Complete. It's seeking balance. It needs us to finish what was begun." She turned sharply. "You mean?" "Yes." He took a step closer, his voice low but steady. "It needs our bond, the truth of it, freely given. If we deny it again, it will shatter. The wards won't hold." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the chamber in white fire. Minerva's heart pounded. "You're asking me to surrender everything I am, to bare my soul before magic itself." He gave a small, rueful smile. I'm asking you to trust that what's between us is strong enough to save this place." The ground shook beneath them, the runes flaring brighter. Minerva clenched her jaw. The castle's hum rose into a low melodic vibration, and in it she could almost hear voices, the whispers of the founders themselves. She took a step forward. If this is what Hogwarts demands, then so be it. They moved together into the center of the glowing runes. The light surrounded them, golden and warm. Alaric took her hand, his touch steady despite the storm raging around them. "Say it," he said softly. She met his eyes, and for the first time she allowed herself to speak the truth she had locked away for months, perhaps years. "I care for you, Alaric Byrne, more deeply than I thought myself capable. But understand this, I give you not weakness, but strength." His fingers tightened around hers. "And I give you the same. Whatever happens now, we face it together." The runes flared in response, blazing with blinding light. The golden hue spread up the walls, through the ceiling, out into the very bones of the castle. Every corridor, every tower, every stone vibrated with life. The storm outside roared, thunder crashing like a heartbeat. Then, all at once, it ceased. Silence fell, a silence so deep it seemed sacred. Minerva opened her eyes slowly. The chamber was dim again, the runes faintly glowing. The air was still, calm, peaceful. Alaric released her hand, but did not step away. "It's done," he whispered. "The wards are whole." She felt it too, the hum beneath her feet, steady and serene. The magic of Hogwarts was complete once more, not because of power or duty, but because of the connection they had finally allowed to exist. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them was full of warmth and exhaustion, and something that felt like wonder. At last, she said, "You've bound yourself to this castle now. There's no going back." He smiled faintly. "Then I'm exactly where I belong." When they left the tower, the air outside was clear. The storm had passed, leaving the stars bright and sharp above the turrets. The scent of rain filled the night, mingling with the faint sweetness of the first blossoms of spring. They walked in silence until they reached the doors of her office. She turned to him there, her face unreadable. "Good night, Professor Byrne." "Good night, Minerva." He hesitated as though he wanted to say more, then only bowed his head slightly and turned away. She watched him go, her heart calm, yet strangely full. As she stepped inside and closed the door behind her, the fire in the hearth flared to life on its own, its flames dancing in quiet celebration. For the first time in many years, Minerva McGonagall felt not only the weight of her duty, but the quiet, enduring warmth of being truly seen. And deep beneath the castle, the golden runes of Hogwarts glowed softly, whispering to the stones that love, once given freely, had made the ancient magic whole again. The spring that followed the great storm was unlike any Hogwarts had ever seen. The air itself seemed laced with a quiet magic, a hum of renewal that lingered in every corridor and classroom. Blossoms appeared earlier than ever before, unfurling white and gold petals across the castle grounds. The lake shimmered with light even under clouded skies, and laughter, bright, unrestrained laughter, echoed through the halls once more. For the first time since the war, Hogwarts felt wholly alive. Minerva McGonagall watched it all from her office window one bright morning, the warmth of sunlight soft against her face. Yet her thoughts were not on the beauty outside. They were on the man who stood once more at the heart of the defense classroom, teaching a group of eager students how to face the dark with courage and wit. Alaric Byrne. Since the night they had completed the wards, a quiet understanding had settled between them, an invisible thread, steady and unbreakable. They spoke often, still, of lessons and responsibilities, of ministry decrees and student mischief. But there was something different now. Every word held an unspoken depth, a tenderness neither sought to name. Yet Minerva was wary. She had given herself over to the castle once, to its magic and its needs. Now she feared she had given more, to a man who had quietly become part of her world. That evening, as twilight bled into gold across the lake, she found herself walking toward the northern tower again. The wards there had been silent for weeks, glowing softly in the dark, like veins of starlight beneath the stone. She stood in the center of the chamber, her hand brushing along the cool runes etched into the floor. "Rest well, old friend," she murmured to the castle. "You've earned your peace." "You speak to it as though it were a person," said a voice behind her. She turned. Alaric stood at the doorway, his robes dusted with parchment and chalk, his smile faint but genuine. "It listens," she said simply. "Perhaps it always has." He stepped into the room, his gaze following the runes. "Do you ever wonder what it thinks of us? These humans who come and go, leaving our memories buried in its stones?" "All the time," she admitted. "But I suspect it doesn't judge. It remembers." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "It remembers us too." There was no need to ask what he meant. She could feel it as well, the echo of that night when the castle had bound their magic, when their hearts had spoken in tandem. The bond had not faded with the ward's restoration. It lived still, woven into the very air between them. "I had a dream," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "A few nights ago, I stood here and the runes glowed brighter than ever. But when I looked down, they weren't symbols anymore. They were words, a message written in flame." Minerva tilted her head. "And what did it say?" He hesitated, then smiled ruefully. "It said, 'Don't be afraid to stay.'" The words struck her like a spell. She turned away, her fingers tightening on her wand. "Dreams are unreliable teachers." "Sometimes," he said, "but sometimes they show us the truths we refuse to speak." She drew a slow breath, steadying herself. "And what truth would that be?" "That I don't wish to leave," he said softly. "Not Hogwarts, not you." For a heartbeat, the world went still. The hum of magic in the walls seemed to deepen, like the slow inhale of something ancient and listening. "Alaric," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "This life, mine, has never allowed for such attachments. I've lost too many to trust in permanence." He moved closer, his expression solemn but unwavering. "Permanence isn't the point. It's the moments that matter, the choice to care even when we know how fragile it is." The truth of it ached within her. All her life, she had chosen duty over comfort, reason over desire. Yet as she stood there, surrounded by the golden heartbeat of the wards they had restored, she realized that love, real love, was not a betrayal of duty. It was its completion. The runes beneath them glowed faintly in answer, as though the castle agreed. "I don't know how to begin again," she confessed. He smiled, stepping closer until only a breath separated them. "Then we begin as we always do, one step, One day, one heartbeat at a time. Minerva looked up at him, her sharp green eyes softening in the light. "You make it sound so simple." "Magic rarely is," he said. "But love is simpler than we think." A silence fell between them, warm and full of meaning. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined, the gesture quiet and sure. The wards around them brightened again, the runes shifting once more. But this time the light was steady, not wild. It pulsed gently, like the breath of the castle itself, content at last. When they left the tower together, the night had turned clear. The moon hung high over the forbidden forest, casting a silver path across the grounds. They walked side by side, their steps unhurried. The students had long since gone to sleep. Only the soft hoot of an owl and the whisper of wind accompanied them. "Do you think it will last?" Alaric asked after a while. "This peace?" Minerva glanced up at the stars. "Nothing lasts forever, but perhaps that's what gives it meaning." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then I suppose our task is simply to cherish it while it's here." She smiled faintly. "A lesson worth teaching." When they reached the foot of the staircase, she stopped, turning toward him. "You'll stay then, at Hogwarts?" "If you'll have me," he said, his tone both serious and hopeful. "I suspect the castle would object if I didn't," she replied. "It seems to have taken a liking to you." He chuckled softly. "Then it's decided." They lingered a moment longer before parting ways, and as she climbed the stairs to her office, Minerva felt something within her shift, a lightness she had not known in decades. Later that night, as she sat by the fire, the castle's quiet murmur reached her ears again. The flames in the hearth flickered gold, echoing the glow of the runes deep below. "Don't be afraid to stay." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth settle deep within her. For once, she did not resist it. Hogwarts had been her home for longer than she could remember, its walls her sanctuary, its secrets her burden. But now it was more than that. It was alive again, a living symphony of magic and memory, of courage and love. And somewhere within its vast and ancient heart, it held the echo of two souls who had found each other, not through chance, but through the will of the magic itself. The castle sighed contentedly around her, its stones whispering approval. Outside, spring rain began to fall, soft and cleansing, carrying with it the promise of something new. By the time April settled over the highlands, the castle had fully awakened to spring. The snow was gone, replaced by carpets of emerald moss and wild flowers that crept up the stone walls. The lake rippled under skies of silver blue, reflecting the towers like tall ghosts of memory. And everywhere Minerva McGonagall walked, she could feel the hum of life beneath her feet, steady, strong, content. Hogwarts was healed, but Minerva herself was not sure she was. She had grown accustomed over the decades to living by rhythm, duty at dawn, work until dusk, then the quiet solitude of her chambers. Her heart had long been trained to silence. Now it seemed to have found a pulse again, and she did not know what to do with it. It was Alaric's fault, of course, or perhaps not fault, fate. He was everywhere these days. In the great hall, his laughter easy and warm as he spoke with the students. In the staff room, debating with Flitwick about the ethics of magical defense. In the courtyard, helping first years repair miscast charms. The castle loved him, and Minerva could hardly deny she did too. But love, real, living love, was a thing that frightened her more than war ever had. And so she watched from a distance, as was her habit. She spoke to him often, yes, and when their eyes met, there was a warmth that neither of them pretended not to feel. But something in her held back, bound by habit, by years, by fear of what she might lose if she dared to step forward. It was on one such morning that an unexpected summons arrived. A letter bearing the seal of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Minerva read it twice, her lips pressed into a thin line. They wished to review her term as headmistress. Not unusual, of course. Routine procedure. But something about the tone was different this time. Too formal, too polite. By evening, her suspicions were confirmed. At the staff meeting that night, Alaric lingered behind after the others had gone. "I heard about the letter," he said quietly. "They're questioning your leadership again, aren't they?" She raised an eyebrow. "Your sources are quick." He smiled faintly. "Hogwarts has a way of whispering things. Are they pressing for retirement?" "They might be," she admitted. "They've grown uneasy with change. The castle has altered in ways even they cannot explain, and they believe I've meddled with its foundations." Alaric's expression darkened. "Then I'll tell them the truth, that it was my doing as much as yours, that what happened here saved Hogwarts." "Do that," she said dryly, "and they'll have your resignation alongside mine." "No, Alaric, this is my burden to bear." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Minerva, listen to me. You don't have to fight this alone." Her eyes softened, though her words remained firm. "I have never done otherwise." He sighed, frustration flickering across his face. "You're still protecting everyone but yourself. And you're still far too reckless for your own good," she countered. A small silence followed, edged with both fondness and sorrow. "I will speak to them," she said at last. "I'll defend what we've done here. But whatever happens, Hogwarts will remain safe. That's all that matters." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "That's not all that matters to me." The words struck something deep within her. She looked away before he could see it in her face. "Good night, Professor Byrne." "Good night, Headmistress," he replied, and left her standing alone in the flickering firelight. The hearing took place 2 weeks later. Representatives from the ministry and the board arrived in carriages that gleamed under the rain. They were kind, courteous, but cold. Men and women who loved order more than magic. Minerva met them with her usual dignity. She led them through the great hall, through the classrooms, through the tower where the golden runes still glowed faintly beneath the stone. She spoke of restoration, of the school's thriving spirit, of how no harm had come to student or staff. Yet she could feel their skepticism with every nod, every polite smile. When they gathered in the headmistress's office for the final discussion, the eldest of them, a sharp-eyed wizard named Vortimer Blaine, leaned forward. "Headmistress," he said, "there have been reports that the castle's wards now respond not to the ministry's key charms, but to personal connections between members of the staff." Minerva's jaw tightened. "The wards respond to the unity of the school. That has always been their nature." "And yet," Blaine continued smoothly, "they seem to have grown stronger after certain emotional events. We are told the defense against the dark arts professor was involved." "Professor Byrne acted under my authority," she said sharply. "He has done nothing but protect this institution. Blaine smiled thinly. Perhaps, but the question remains, has Hogwarts magic become dependent on your relationship? The room fell silent. For a heartbeat, Minerva could hear only the rain against the windows. "My relationship with this school," she said at last, her voice cool as iron, "is what sustains it. My colleagues and I have rebuilt what war sought to destroy. If that offends your sensibilities, I suggest you find a less human form of leadership." Blaine's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. When the meeting ended, the officials left in silence. Minerva stood by the window long after their carriages had disappeared into the rain. She felt the weight of years pressing against her shoulders, the burden of the castle, the students, the endless fight to preserve what could not be replaced. A soft knock broke her reverie. "Enter," she said. Alaric stepped inside, his hair damp from the rain. "They're gone?" She nodded. "For now." He studied her face for a long moment. "You didn't tell me they would accuse us both." "I didn't wish to burden you." "You never do," he said quietly. Something in his tone made her chest tighten. He stepped closer, his expression unguarded for once. "You keep trying to stand apart from everything you've built, as though you're afraid it will crumble if you let yourself belong to it." She opened her mouth to protest, but he continued, his voice rough with feeling. "You belong here, Minerva. You always have. And if you think for a second that this castle, or I, could stand without you, you're wrong." The words struck deeper than he could know. For a moment, she could not breathe. The firelight flickered across his face, the storm painting shadows across the room. Finally, she whispered, "You risk too much." "For you," he said, with a small, sad smile. "Always." Outside, the storm eased. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the wet stone. And deep beneath their feet, the wards thrummed faintly, as if the castle itself, listening as always, approved. Minerva closed her eyes. For once, she did not silence her heart. Perhaps, she thought, love was not a distraction from duty, but its purest form. When she opened her eyes again, Alaric was still there, steady, waiting, a promise she had not realized she needed. "Stay," she said softly. He nodded once, without hesitation. And as the rain cleared over the towers of Hogwarts, Minerva McGonagall finally allowed herself to believe that some bonds were not meant to be broken at all. The summer term unfolded beneath skies of soft gold and rolling clouds, the highlands vibrant with new life. The final term of the school year had always been Minerva McGonagall's favourite. The castle bathed in sunlight, the laughter of students carrying through the courtyards, the feeling of work well done. Yet this year it felt different. Hogwarts was no longer simply a school in her eyes. It was alive, more so than ever before, its heart beating in quiet harmony with her own. Every morning, as she walked the corridors, she could feel the magic within the stones hum beneath her touch. The wards had grown steady, the air rich with energy. Even the portraits seemed brighter, their colours restored, their spirits renewed. But beneath the calm, a quiet tension lingered, the aftermath of her hearing with the board. Though she had defended her position fiercely, Minerva knew that rumours persisted in the ministry. Whispers of unregulated magic, emotional interference, and personal entanglements reached her ears even now. Yet, for the first time in many years, she did not feel alone in facing them. Alaric had stood beside her through it all. Their companionship had grown into something quiet yet unshakable. It was not a romance of public declarations or stolen kisses in shadowed halls. No, it was subtler, rooted in understanding, in long walks through the castle grounds, in shared cups of tea as the firelight flickered over parchment and ink. There was comfort in it, and peace, and a depth that words could not contain. The castle seemed to sense it too. When they were together, the air carried a warmth that spread outward, touching even the students who felt it without knowing why. The harmony between them had become part of Hogwarts itself, a bond of trust and devotion woven into the very fabric of its magic. Still, Minerva could not ignore the feeling that change was coming. It began one evening in early June. She was walking alone through the courtyard when a faint shimmer caught her eye, an aurora of golden light rippling through the air above the stone. The same light that had once filled the runic chamber beneath the castle. Her pulse quickened. "Not again," she murmured, though her voice held no fear. The castle's magic no longer frightened her. It spoke to her. The glow drifted upward, swirling into the air before her, and in the midst of it, faint and translucent, a familiar figure appeared, the same spectral woman they had met in the depths of winter, Rowena's ancient apprentice. "Headmistress," the spirit whispered, her voice as soft as wind through the pines. The castle stirs once more. Minerva inclined her head calmly. "I know. Tell me what it seeks." "The cycle renews," said the ghost. "For centuries, Hogwarts has bound itself to those who love it. But now the wards have found new strength. The magic no longer depends only on the past. It draws from the living, from you." Minerva's brow furrowed. "From me?" "From your bond," the spirit said, smiling faintly. "From love freely given and received. The castle has learned from you, Minerva McGonagall. It no longer clings to loss. It grows." The light shimmered once more and then faded, leaving only the soft whisper of evening air. Minerva stood still for a long time, her heart strangely light. The ghost's words echoed within her. It grows. The next morning, she found Alaric in the courtyard, surrounded by students practicing shield charms. He stood tall, calm, the sunlight glinting in his grey-streaked hair. When he saw her, his expression softened. "Good morning, headmistress," he said with mock formality. She arched an eyebrow. "Flattery before breakfast, Professor Byrne. A bold tactic." He laughed quietly, and the students grinned before hurrying off to their next class. When they were alone, Minerva stepped closer. "I saw her again," she said. "The spirit?" She nodded. "She told me the castle draws from the living now, from us." He was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the towers. "Then it's no longer merely a place of memory. It's alive in the truest sense." "Yes," she murmured, "and it will continue to live long after we are gone." He turned to her then, his voice low. "And what of us, Minerva? What happens to the ones who gave it that life?" She met his eyes, their blue steady and searching. "We remain," she said. "In its walls, its wards, its stories. Hogwarts remembers." He smiled faintly, a touch of sadness in it. "Then I suppose there are worse fates." "Much worse," she agreed. They stood in silence for a while, the wind tugging gently at their robes. Around them, the castle hummed quietly, the sound of its living magic woven through every breath of air. The year ended as all school years must, with laughter, farewells, and the bittersweet hush of departure. The great hall glittered under floating candles as the students celebrated their last feast. Minerva watched them with quiet pride, her heart full. When the feast ended and the carriages rolled away toward Hogsmeade, the castle fell into its familiar summer calm. Only a few professors remained, tidying classrooms and preparing for the next term. Alaric found her that evening in the courtyard once more, where the last light of day lingered in the sky. "Do you ever tire of beginnings and endings?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Never," she said. "They remind me that magic, like life, is meant to renew itself." He was silent for a moment, then said softly, "I've been offered a position at the ministry. They want me to oversee defensive research. I haven't given them an answer." Minerva's hands tightened around the folds of her cloak. "You're considering leaving?" He looked at her carefully. "I told them I would speak to you first." A long silence followed. The air was warm, the scent of rain still clinging to the grass. Finally, she said, "If you wish to go, I won't stop you. But know this, Alaric. Hogwarts will remember you, as will I." He took a slow breath, then shook his head. "Then I can't go. This is where I belong, with the castle, and with you." Her eyes softened, and she said nothing, for words seemed too fragile for what she felt. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. The castle's hum deepened, wrapping around them like a heartbeat. The walls glowed faintly, the golden light of the wards rising once more, not in warning this time, but in blessing. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and full. "Then stay. Stay as long as magic allows." "I will," he whispered, "for as long as you'll have me." The sun dipped behind the hills, and the last light of evening fell upon them both. The castle stood tall and silent around them, its ancient heart at peace. Within its stones, new stories were being written, of courage, of devotion, of two souls who had found each other amidst ruin and rebuilt what had been broken. Minerva McGonagall, headmistress of Hogwarts, looked toward the glowing towers and smiled. "Welcome home," she murmured. And deep within the walls, where the old runes slept and the living magic pulsed, the castle itself seemed to sigh in reply, content, eternal, and alive.